Because A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is such an interior book, it's helpful to have some historical and cultural backgrounds and even some personal information about the author in order to help us understand the novel. This map shows you the geography of the island of Ireland. On this map, you can see the 4 large regions colored in different colors. Ireland had been a colonial possession of Great Britain or the United Kingdom for 600 years by the time Portrait was written. During that time, the Irish had rebelled with regularity, wanting to govern themselves, and the British had suppressed those rebellions and taken countermeasures to prevent future rebellions. One of these countermeasures was the banning of the Irish language from being spoken anywhere in the Irish island. By the time Joyce was born, the only native Irish speakers left were on the far west coast of Ireland, in Galway and on the Aran Isles off the coast. Most of the people, like James Joyce, spoke English as their mother tongue. However, Irish people had distinct Irish accents and used phrasing that derived from Irish, even though most people had never heard it spoken. For example, an Irish term for deaf is bothered. That's an English word, but it comes from a similar-sounding Irish word that means deaf. Another thing the British did to control Ireland was to restrict the economic, social, and educational possibilities of Irish Catholic people. Catholicism was the dominant religion in Ireland then and now. The British had become Protestants because of Henry VIII's marital troubles, and the established church in England and in Ireland was Protestant. Catholics could not own land, take certain jobs, or attend the ancient and prestigious university in Dublin, Trinity College. This is because all of those things required taking an oath to the King of England as head of the church and defender of the faith, which Catholics would not do. To even out the numbers a bit, and to relieve a problem they had at home, England sent a bunch of Scots dissenters, Protestants who did not belong to the Church of England, but rather to Presbyterian churches, to Northern Ireland. The part of the map you see that is colored blue is Ulster, where the Protestants were settled. This, of course, set in motion the issues that would rise at the time of Irish independence. Ulster is still part of the United Kingdom, instead of the Republic of Ireland. The English thought the Irish were savages who needed civilizing. As part of their reign, they built beautiful 18th century buildings like the Four Courts pictured here. Irish people were not allowed to vote on their own laws or governance. Instead, Britain ruled from buildings like this one. The building you see here, in pictures I took myself on an overcast day in Dublin, is the National Bank of Ireland building. But before this building became the bank, it was the place where the Irish Parliament met. British dissolved the Irish Parliament with his Act of Union in 1800. After that date, the Irish people elected a few representatives to the British Parliament, where of course they were vastly outnumbered by the British representatives there. The room you go into if you want to exchange money or engage in other banking transactions is the former House of Commons. You can still visit the room the upper chamber of the Parliament met in and hear a very interesting presentation by a Dublin-based historian. I've already talked about the religion issue in Ireland. Dublin has 2 ancient cathedrals, St. Patrick's Cathedral and Christ Church Cathedral pictured here. Both of them are Protestant churches, part of the Church of Ireland, which is affiliated with the Church of England and headed by the English monarch. Catholics in Dublin did not call their churches church because of this. They called them chapels. Most Dubliners were Catholic, not Protestant, so there were plenty of Catholic houses of worship. But this linguistic nuance shows how aware all Catholics were of the unequal footing on which they stood. Now for some personal history. This is a picture of James Joyce as a toddler, about 2 years old. He was the oldest child in the large family of John and May Murray Joyce. John Joyce was a gentleman who had inherited property from his family in Cork. To be a gentleman in those days was to live off income from property rather than working at a job. Unfortunately for the Joyce family, John Joyce was a drunkard who wasted his inheritance, eventually impoverishing the family. Because James was the oldest, he got to experience some of the advantages of being from a well-to-do family, such as attending exclusive private schools. His little brothers, and especially his little sisters, did not have these advantages. This picture shows James Joyce, age 6, on the eve of leaving home for boarding school. He is pictured with his grandfather Murray, his mother, and his father. Both the Murray and Joyce families perceived that young Jim was gifted. His father, wanting him to get every advantage, petitioned the headmaster of Clongowes College to admit James at an unusually early age. Generally speaking, the youngest children at Clongowes were at least 9 years old. Clongowes was run by Jesuits, an order known for their scholarly bent, and was considered the best school in Ireland for Catholic boys. This individual portrait also shows Joyce at 6 years old, just on the verge of leaving for boarding school. Here we see little James Joyce with his class at Clongowes. Joyce is the very small boy in the light gray suit sitting on the ground in front of the priest. Look at the other boys in his class. You can see that some of them are more than twice his size. Even the next smallest boy is much bigger than Joyce. Clongowes organized boys into classes based on skill at Latin primarily, but also math and other subjects. The class of elements is the first class boys would join at the college. There, they would learn arithmetic, history, and Latin grammar. Once their skill warranted it, they would be moved up to the next class. When Joyce was at Clongowes the class of elements had boys from age 9 to age 13. Joyce, at age 6, was so young that he was not initially allowed to sleep in the dormitories with the other boys. Instead, he slept in the infirmary, under the watchful eye of the infirmarian. Now, Joyce is obviously taking some of his own memories of childhood and using them in portrait. But don't be fooled into thinking Stephen is just James Joyce under another name. Joyce's nickname as a child was Sunny Jim, because he was so unfailingly happy and cheerful. He loved sports at school and won medals for running hurdles and playing Irish football, which is a little like rugby, but bloodier. Unlike Stephen, who was punished only once at school, and unjustly at that, James Joyce appears in the punishment records of Clongowes several times for things like using bad language, that probably meant using slang instead of formal English, and wearing his athletic shoes in the house. He was not the brooding fellow Stephen is. In Chapter 1, Stephen dreams about the death of Parnell while he is sick with a fever. The death of Parnell did happen while Joyce was at Clongowes but later, when Joyce was 9 years old and about to leave Clongowes to return to Dublin. Parnell was an Irish politician. He was Protestant, so he was able to participate in civil society in a way Catholics could not. But he was a staunch advocate of Irish independence. He helped to unite the Irish people and the Irish Church behind a vision of independence and a method for attaining it. He was a threat to the British government, which benefited greatly from having Ireland as a colony and didn't want to give it up. So they set in motion a plot to get rid of Parnell. Parnell had the misfortune to fall in love with a married woman. Although she was separated from her husband, it wasn't possible for her to get a divorce. In those days, men could divorce their wives for adultery, but women couldn't divorce their husbands for the same reason. Men could divorce their wives for cruelty, but women couldn't divorce their husbands, no matter how viciously men treated their wives. Catherine O'Shea's husband was a cruel drunkard who mistreated his wife. She left him, but remained married because of the way divorce law was written. Eventually, she and Parnell met, fell in love, and wanted to be together. But of course they could not marry because Catherine, known as Kitty in the press, could not obtain a divorce. So they lived together, not flaunting their relationship but also not hiding it. This relationship was known to everyone for a very long time, many years before it became a problem. Of course, this was Parnell's Achilles' heel, the place where Britain could attack him. They did this by offering the Irish Catholic Church some things they had wanted for a long time in exchange for them denouncing Parnell. The alliance Parnell had forged between Irish Republicans and the Church was broken as a result of this deal. Parnell was disgraced, and shortly after that, he died. You can see the effect of all this at the Christmas dinner scene in Chapter 1, but Parnell haunts all of portrait. the great hope for Irish independence, happening in a peaceful way, was over. This image shows Joyce at university. After Clongowes Wood, Joyce attended the Free Christian Brothers School for a while. Stephen does not attend that school. Instead, his father speaks disparagingly of the boys who go there. Stephen just wanders the streets of Dublin and reads trashy books while he is between schools. The arrival of Joyce's former master at Clongowes to become headmaster at Belvedere, a Jesuit day school in Dublin, set the scene for scholarships that allowed Joyce and his younger brothers to attend that prestigious school. After graduation, he stayed with the Jesuits, attending University College Dublin. This school was the best place to get post-secondary education in Ireland if you were Catholic. Joyce is standing just to the left of the tree, looking at the camera in a grim and purposeful way. This picture shows Joyce as a young man, not too long after he finished university and just before he left for Paris, initially to study medicine. Someone asked Joyce later what he was thinking in this picture, and he replied, "I was wondering if he, that is the photographer, would lend me 10 bob." Joyce lived in Paris for a year, mostly destitute and mostly not attending the classes he was nominally there to take. He returned to Dublin in 1903 when his mother was dying of stomach cancer. He spent some time working as a teacher in a boys' school, but mostly he was writing and trying to make his way as a writer. In 1904, he met Nora Barnacle, a young woman from Galway who worked as a chambermaid at Finn's Hotel. Joyce described his first date with her as "the day you made me a man." We don't know exactly what this means. Joyce had already had sex with a variety of women by the time he met Nora, and that's usually the obvious explanation. But in any case, James and Nora were deeply in love with one another and eloped to the continent not long after they met. Joyce only returned to Ireland briefly after that, but he said that as long as he had Nora, he had Ireland with him. When James and Nora arrived on the continent, they went to Paris, where Joyce had been promised work at the Berlitz School, teaching English as a second language. But alas, there was no job there. They were sent on to other Berlitz schools that nominally had jobs to fill, finally settling in Trieste, Italy, after much travel. This is where their 2 children were born, and where Joyce wrote his book of short stories, Dubliners, and his first novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It's also where he began to work on his masterwork, Ulysses. Joyce and Nora and their 2 children, Giorgio and Lucia, enjoyed life in Trieste, though they were usually very poor. They spoke Italian at home as well as English, and various members of Joyce's family traveled to stay with them, all hoping for a chance at a better life. During the First World War, the Joyce family fled to Switzerland because Trieste was in a part of Italy that was quickly invaded by the Austro-Hungarian army. Joyce's brother Stanislaus did not get out in time and was interned in a prison camp for the duration of the war. In Zurich, Joyce continued to work on Ulysses and had the first of many eye operations that plagued him for the rest of his life. The family returned to Trieste after the war, but Portrait, which had been serialized in an English magazine in 1914 and 1915, and finally published as a book in 1916, made a big enough splash that the Joyce family's finances began to look better, primarily because of the patronage of Harriet Shaw Weaver, a rich heiress who published the magazine Portrait had been serialized in, and who became Joyce's main patron after the war. She encouraged him to move to Paris and to stop working at the Berlitz School, which he did, so that he could concentrate on finishing Ulysses. He remained in Paris until the Second World War, when he took his family to Switzerland again, dying in January 1941 after an operation for a stomach ulcer.